Hello friends, my name is Eric Cloward and welcome to the Stoic Coffee Break. The Stoic Coffee Break is a weekly podcast where I take an aspect of Stoicism and do my best to break it down to its most important points and talk about how we can apply this in our daily lives. I talk about my successes and my failures and hope that you can learn something from my experience, all within the space of a coffee break. This week's episode is called, What Are You Thinking? How aware are you of what you're actually thinking? How aware are you of what you're actually feeling? Most of us like to think that we're pretty aware of what's going on in our minds or what emotion is currently driving us. I mean, we're the ones inside of our mind, so we should know what we're thinking or feeling, right? Well, not always. Often the thoughts and emotions inside my head are busy, confusing, conflicting, and overwhelming. So today, we're going to talk about the most important mental skill that you can develop to be a good Stoic: awareness. Marcus Aurelius said, "Objective judgment at this very moment, unselfish action now at this very moment, willing acceptance now at this very moment of all external events. That's all you need." One of the most important principles of Stoicism is that we are in control of our thoughts and choices and actions. But if we're not even aware of the thoughts that are going on in our head, how are we going to be in control of what we're thinking? I mean, how many times have you had a song stuck in your head that you tried to get rid of, only to find yourself absent-mindedly humming it a few hours later? So it's estimated that we have around 65,000 thoughts a day. I mean, that's a lot of noise going on in our minds, and most of those thoughts go barely or even completely unnoticed. I mean, it's no wonder by the end of the day, we're often tired and weary and ready to give our brains a rest, even if we have done nothing particularly physically or mentally demanding. It's just the ongoing chatter in our minds can be incredibly exhausting. So why is it so important that we know what we're thinking? Because what we think creates the emotions that we have, and those emotions influence the choices that we make and the actions that we take. And if we're not focusing our awareness on the current moment, then our mind is somewhere else, or maybe somewhen else. And we may be thinking about the past or anticipating what might happen in the future. But when we choose to be mindful and to be aware, then we are also much more present in our lives. We are here now, as they say, and not with our minds wandering through other times and other spaces, unless we choose to let that happen. Because there's nothing wrong with letting your mind wander and to allow yourself to be bored or to use your imagination. But often, when the work in front of us is challenging, we allow ourselves to just get distracted by other things because we don't want to focus on the hard work. Our brains are lazy, and while we can allow our brains to be lazy, it should be a choice and not a default way of acting because we are trying to avoid something. The Twitter user, The Ancient Sage, said, "Self-control is all about moment-to-moment self-awareness. You catch yourself doing or about to do something undesirable, see that it isn't good for you in the long term, and as a result of this awareness, abstain from doing it." So first, I want to talk about why we might want to be unaware. I think there are a lot of reasons why we may not want to be aware of what's going on around us. For example, I like to think that I'm a pretty good person, but there are definitely parts of me that I don't really like. Sometimes I behave in ways that I'm really not that proud of. I can say things that are mean and hurtful, and I don't like these kind of shadowy parts all that much because they aren't the person that I imagine myself to be, so being aware of and owning these shadow parts can be very uncomfortable. Sometimes being aware of the world around us can also just be painful. I think a lot of people genuinely don't like the lives that they're living, but they feel like it's just kind of their lot in life. I know that I felt this way growing up, and that I had very little choice to follow except what the church had laid out for me as the way I was supposed to live my life. And I think many people, if they became more aware of their lives and they knew that they could choose to do something about it, I think many people would just shrink back in fear because change is hard. Change is scary. And it's a lot safer to remain in ignorance than to accept the challenge of improving your life and making your own choices. I think people will ignore what's going on around them because reality can just be too painful. To be truly mindful and aware is to accept life for what it really is. Amor fati is ultimately about awareness. It is about doing your best to be aware of what is really happening, to acknowledge it, and to accept it, and not just wish it to be otherwise. I think, therefore I am what I think I am. Too new. The hardest part about mindfulness is to remember to be mindful, because mindfulness is a choice. It is something that we have to actively work on. We don't just wake up one day being mindful. It's something that we have to constantly practice each minute of the day. So we have to develop strategies. To be aware of our current experience is to be more fully alive, though, rather than sleepwalking with our head stuck in the past or the future. It's also to choose to be here in this very moment. When we can be present in this moment, then we're truly alive. We are experiencing everything around us much more intensely. Having a higher level of awareness does not mean that life automatically becomes easier. But the more mindful we are, the more effective we are in our lives. We are more aware of the choices that we make. We can even choose to reduce the number of choices that we have to make each day. Something as simple as this can save us a lot of time and energy so that we can be much more effective with the choices that we decide to take on. Another area where being mindful is incredibly helpful is that many of us try to do too many things at once. We like to think that we can multitask and that we can do it all. But there have been plenty of studies that have shown that multitasking is not really something that we can do as humans. This constant task switching extracts a cost every time we move from one task to the next. It takes our brains sometimes to kind of get back in the groove of the previous task that we were working on. And when we cultivate mindfulness, you can be more aware when you are task switching so that you can be more deliberate when you actually choose to switch tasks. Reducing the amount of times that you switch back and forth between different tasks reduces the amount of ramp-up time that you have. When you're more mindful of what you're doing, you are better able to accomplish your task because you are much more present. And when you are more present, you are much more engaged with the actual task that you're doing. Because you're focused on what you're doing, the quality of your work is much, much better because that's where all your resources are going. In sports and other performance-based activities, there's this concept of being in what they call a flow state. And this is where the process of what you're working on feels so smooth and that you are in the zone, if you will. I think that most of us have experienced this state when we become engrossed in whatever it is we're doing. I know that often when I play piano, I fall into that nice flow state. We feel energized, we have a clear focus, and a proficiency at the task that we're working on. But what if we decided to take this idea and work on applying it in our daily lives? What if we were to apply this kind of mindfulness as just a way of being? Now, why would we want to be in a more flow state throughout our daily lives? I mean, wouldn't you want to feel more energized and focused and proficient in your daily life? I mean, there's a lot of benefits from working in a flow state. We can be more aware of ourselves and our thinking. We are able to make decisions faster with more clarity. We're much more relaxed and focused and can definitely tap into the better parts of our thinking. So the moment-to-moment awareness that I'm talking about is difficult to achieve. It takes a lot of energy and effort and practice. But if we want to become truly in control of our thoughts and choices and our actions, then we need to practice this kind of awareness. And that's just what it is, a practice. You'll never be 100% aware all the time. We're just not wired for that kind of vigilance. And some days you'll be better at it, and some days you'll struggle. But every day you practice on being more mindful, the more you'll feel in touch with the world and with yourself. This kind of practice also helps you to be more intentional about your life. Because you are paying more attention to what you are thinking, you can be more deliberate about the choices you make, and not just being reactive to everything that comes your way. There are a lot of different ways to practice mindfulness, but it's really just about choosing to focus your attention on something. And this is something that you can do with pretty much anything. I mean, it can just be taking a moment to really focus on the sounds around you and the different textures and timbres that you hear. You can look closely at a painting or a picture. Try to notice as many details about it as you can. When you're eating your lunch, you can think about the different textures and tastes and scents that you might be able to detect. So, one practice that I've been using over the past couple of weeks is what I call AAA. And that stands for awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance. And the way that I do this is I try throughout the day, whenever I remember or whenever I check the time on a clock, to ask myself what I'm feeling. And then I acknowledge it by simply saying, I'm feeling whatever it is that I'm feeling, whether that's anxious or bored or sad or happy or whatever. And then I accept it. I don't try to change it. I just accept it by saying, and that's okay. When you're more aware of your feelings, you're more aware of the impact that they have on your choices and the actions that you take. I know for me that a lot of times after I've gotten into an argument and I'm reflecting on what happened, I recognize how unaware I was of how I was feeling beforehand. I may have been irritable, but since I wasn't being mindful, I let how I was feeling color my perspective, which changed the meaning that I gave to something. And that judgment impacted the choices that I made of how to handle that situation. If we want to take control of the things that we can control, namely our thoughts, emotions, choices, and actions, then we need to increase our self-awareness. And as we become more mindful, we become more present in our lives. You could say that your life becomes more real. Colors seem a lot more vivid. You notice more of your surroundings. You're a lot more present for the people around you. Being more aware means being more alive. And that's the end of this week's Stoic Coffee Break. Be good to yourself, be good to others, and thanks for listening.